Hello, Garland Nixon, with the one and only Mark Sleboda, a professional cynic. We are all amateurs. We are all B-League cynics trying to learn from the best. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with the one and only Mark Sleboda. Mark, before we get going, where can people find your good works online?
Garland, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show. If you, really are looking for
a glutton for punishment.
Yeah, a glutton for punishment. That's exactly the phrase I was looking for. If you're that much of a glutton for the sadomasochistic pleasures of listening to me rant on a soapbox, then you can find me at Elon Musk's Twitter X at Mark Sleboda1 or at The Real Politique with Mark Sleboda on both Telegram and Substack.
Awesome. All right, Mark, let's get going. It's just things can be so predictable. We're going to go work on a deal. And what is the deal? Let's see. The Ukrainians are getting the living hell smashed out of them. How about you give us 30 days to get ourselves together? It's like you get in a fight. Some guy picks a fight with you. No, wait a minute. Let me do better. You're walking down the street and a mugger attacks you to steal your stuff. You push him down and he's like, hey, can you give me a break? I got to get myself together a minute so we can work things out. No, the answer is no. I'm going to stomp you in the head and then I'm out of here. I'm not giving you a break. So it's now, and it's bad when Kaja Kallas is like, this is a great deal. Let's go with this. And if the Russians don't accept it, then we know they're evil. Of course, we already know they're evil, but we'll be able to yell even louder how evil. Mark Sleboda, what the hell are we doing here? What are we doing, Mark?
Yeah, if the Europeans are suddenly singing the praises of a ceasefire after screaming for war at the top of their lungs for the last couple of weeks, and are all happy and excited, then what the score is with this ceasefire proposal. So first of all, Trump's people, headed with, I believe, Mike Waltz, and for at least part of the time, Trump's businessman / confidant, Steve Witkoff, although I believe he jetted off to another meeting then about Gaza somewhat after. But what's interesting, I would say, is that he met in Riyadh. They didn't meet in the U.S. They didn't meet in Kiev. They didn't meet in Europe. They met in Riyadh. And Trump's people, they said right out, they didn't want Zelensky in the room because obviously they feel that he is an impediment to just about everything, particularly diplomacy. So Zelensky was there. And they were communicating with him the entire time remotely. So I don't really see what the purpose was. He was actually in Riyadh. He just wasn't in the room while the negotiations were taking place.
Was he outside, like having his face pressed against the window and you could see his breath and everything?
He's at the door. Right. MBS keeps walking by, looking at him, shaking his head, First of all, the fact that it was scheduled to be in Riyadh, first of all, it says that the Americans, they wanted to keep the Ukrainians separate, right? They wanted them first to understand psychologically that this is a serious negotiation, right? That this is not friends per se. They wanted to put them in that psychological position. Second of all, they obviously wanted them separated from both Europeans. They didn't want any European allies lobbying for them or pushing them or sticking themselves into the affairs. And they also didn't want any Democrats or neocons like Lindsey Graham stepping in for if the negotiations were held in the U.S. So they wanted them in an isolated space. That's all very interesting psychologically. But Zelensky, it seems, or Zelensky's people, because his chief of staff, Andrei Yermak, whom is he's called the Gray Cardinal of Kiev. Many people in Ukraine believe that he's the actual power. Their political fate is so closely tied together that they actually create this collocation, Zermak. Zelensky plus Yermak. Anyway, so Yermak in this case did what Zelensky should have done before, right? As soon as the topic of a ceasefire came up and the U.S. was promoting a ceasefire, he just should have accepted it outright in the beginning, knowing that Russia has said again and again and again, no ceasefire, right? We're not interested in a ceasefire. We've been through that before. We've been through that in Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 and the Istanbul communique where we pulled our troops away from Kiev and then ripped up the deal and threw it at us, right? Russia is not going, has said again and again and again, right? No ceasefire. Putin said it. Lavrov said it. Peskov has said it. Everyone under the sun has said it. No ceasefire. They're not interested in a ceasefire. They're not interested in any short-term opportunity to pump the Kiev regime more full of weapons and for it to reorganize, train up some more conscripts and send them in. We're not doing that, particularly not when we've got all the advantages on the battlefield. Why would we agree to that? We're interested in diplomacy. We want a long-term settlement because we don't trust you, right? You've blown us again and again and again. I mean, you can go back to the in 2014 to the February 21st agreement when there was supposed to be a power sharing agreement between the sitting president of Ukraine, Yanukovych, and the Maidan opposition on the street. And instead, the right sector the next morning took over. As soon as they pulled the police from the streets, the right sector seized the presidential building, the Rada, the Ukrainian parliament. And then Yanukovych, of course, fled the city. He tried to make like he had business in Donbass, but then the writing was on the wall. Kiev was theirs. And everyone who had been a part of that government or the dominant political party, the Party of Regents, fled, right? And that was it. And why did they flee? Yeah, because a bunch of neo-Nazis seized the capital. I mean, that of course they did. And the Europeans Russia's like, wait a minute, you were guarantees to this February 21st power sharing agreement. And the Europeans are like, what agreement? Oh, did we sign that? Oh, too late. Cow's out of the barn. Too bad. So, I mean, going back to that. So Russia doesn't trust the Europeans, the Americans, certainly not the Kiev regime any farther than they can throw them. And they said, why would we give you this advantage? So all Zelensky had to do was say, sure, ceasefire. We agree to a ceasefire. And with the full knowledge that Russia would block it anyway, they would say no. And then Russia becomes the impediment to peace. Well, stupidly, up until this meeting in Riyadh, Zelensky had been at the White House, saying no ceasefire, no diplomacy, everything, making a fool out of himself, trying to talk over the president and vice president of the United States in the Oval Office. Why he was so against the ceasefire? Because the Kiev regime could use a ceasefire. My God, could they use a ceasefire? They need they're backpedaling all across the contact line now, especially in the Kursk region, where they've as of today been driven out of Suja itself with the ongoing Russian breakthrough there. But they're on the back step everywhere. They're having problems with logistics. They're having problems with manpower. They're having problems with everything. Why they are so politically against it, I can only assume that to some degree, Zelensky must have been afraid of the ultra-nationalist, the Banderite fascist reaction to the idea of a ceasefire, which I don't think he actually needed to worry about, because the situation being what it is, that, even they understand they could, as long as there wasn't any illusion that it was going to be permanent, which, they've made perfectly clear that this one isn't going to be permanent. So, but he's been against it up until now. Well, he smartened up, and they came to Riyadh, and they supposedly, going into the meeting, were behind what they were calling a partial ceasefire. And this is something that had been proposed by Macron about a week ago. Just a ceasefire on in the air and at sea, not on land, right? Just drones and aircraft, right?
Only the areas where Russia has the market advantage.
Missiles, drones, aircraft. Yeah, only the areas where Russia has a 100%, let's say 100%, but a 90% advantage, right? So yeah, that's what he went into. But so Trump went in, and they twisted his arms or whatever. Yermak showed proper submission. He rolled on the floor and showed his belly to Trump. And they said, sure, you want a ceasefire, knowing full well that the Russians will agree to it. Yeah, fine, we're behind that. And Trump immediately reversed the pause on military aid and intelligence aid, if there had ever really been a pause on, at least on intelligence aid. There's a lot of talk that there never really was, but regardless, that was immediately reversed. So they come out of this with a ceasefire proposal, right? This is now being dictated to Russia, right? This was agreed upon by the U.S. and Ukraine without any consultation with Russia on the subject, even though Russia had been saying no ceasefire, no ceasefire, no ceasefire again and again and again. And now they come out and they say, now the ball's in Russia's court. So if Russia says no to the ceasefire, which they've been saying all along, now they can say that Russia is the obstacle to peace. And what they will do is Trump will particularly go to countries that Russia conducts a lot of trade with. I don't think it really has any hope with China, of course, but they will go to India. They will go to Brazil. They will go to other BRICS members, and they will say, look, we just want peace. Yeah, okay, so the last administration, whatever, we're not these guys, but help us force Russia to peace so that we can end this. Stop trading with them. So that is what they will do. They will try to put pressure then on Russia diplomatically, that they are... once again, we'll probably start to hear that Russia is the aggressor, that they want war, blah, blah, blah. And the proxy war is full back on. Trump has returned the flow of weapons, the flow of intelligence, and that hasn't changed at all. So now Russia is presented as a deal. You either say yes, or you are the obstacle to peace. And the deal is here. Because Trump returned the flow of weapons and intelligence to the Kiev regime in basically a week. Was it a week? Was it even a week? I don't think it was even a week.
Yeah, roughly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So it flow of the weapons before the question is even presented to Russia. So now the deal becomes, if you agree to this ceasefire, we will continue to pump Ukraine full of weapons. And if you don't agree to this ceasefire, we will continue to pump Ukraine full of weapons. How can you beat that deal? I mean, that's literally what's being presented. So Russia is supposed to give the Kiev regime a 30 days to recover themselves. When right in the moment that Russia overcomes the defenses with this pipeline special forces operation move in Suja. The entire Kursk salient is collapsing. Suja itself, this town that had been the center point of the incursion, is reported in Russian hands today, and they've basically got just a handful of hamlets right along the border at this point that they probably won't be able to take. Russia already has forces in Sumy region of Ukraine on the other side of the Kursk border. And Russia's not going to stop, of course. Now they've got an army there. They will, and the Kiev regime resistance, they've suffered so many casualties and POWs and everything else, and they're on the back foot. And they haven't built any defenses on the Ukrainian side because they were concentrating so much on trying to build defenses for their incursion inside Russian territory, which was always a fool's crusade, a fool's game. Russia will go right to Sumy, and they will take Sumy, which is a significant city. It's the capital of the Sumy region of Ukraine, and then Sumy goes straight down the road to Kiev, right? And this is where one of the two ways that Russia, in the very beginning of the special military operation, came in. They quick just passed through Sumy, like they didn't even care, and threw them right down the road to Kiev. So that's a serious threat. And Russia's supposed to give that up now, as well as their strangulation of Pokrovsk and the situation in all of these other places where they've got the Kiev regime on the back, crumbling, all along the contact line. For what? For what? What would they get out of this? 30 days.
30 days of rebuilding for Kiev.
And Zelensky has just come out with statements in like the last hour that I've seen. They've started popping up. So they will, of course, continue the mass forced conscription if the ceasefire comes into effect. They won't pause that at all. There won't be any elections in Ukraine until the war is over. So Zelensky is safe now. And until there's a final settlement. And he also announced, and by the way, we discussed it with the Americans, any acceptance of Russian control of territory, Ukrainian territory that the Kiev regime believes that are theirs, including even the Crimea and Donbass, is off the table. We will never accept any of that. So, I mean, we're back already to a maximalist position, that it's absurd. Trump has to know that Russia will not accept this. Now, Russia will probably be diplomatic about it. And they'll probably say, well, it's positive that we're talking, now, right? And that Ukraine is agreed to a ceasefire. And we would be happy to agree to a ceasefire if you meet this and this and this and this and this condition, which we said all the way back last year.
Well, to me, my thought is this: Garland's now in charge of Russia. I put up my the original demands, right? And I say 30 days is not good enough for me. We need a 1-year ceasefire. So that's a great proposal. I'm glad. Thank you very much. That's wonderful that now we're starting to get some proposals back and forth. We've reviewed our proposal for the last 2 or 3 weeks. I've taken at least 3 weeks to get my proposal together, right? Oh, can we have a ceasefire? Well, we got to carefully review this. Then I've got to present it to this guy and that guy. We got to talk. I'm going to kill about 3 weeks saying, I can't make a decision until we've carefully reviewed it. I'm going to write what the hell I did. I'll literally take the original document that I sent them in December of 2021 and just white out the top and put brand new ceasefire proposal 2024. This is great. And we really like it. But we need to touch it up just a little bit. So we're going to give you a counter proposal. Let's talk about this one. And it's great. I'm so happy that the Kiev regime is finally ready to go back and forth and to work on this thing. Because let's face it. I mean, this is me. The Kiev regime and the proxy war and its benefactor came up with a plan for a so-called ceasefire. And they're presenting it to the target of the proxy war. That's not a ceasefire proposal, as it were. Everybody has to be involved. It has to be everybody put something in, and then we all come to something. But the idea that the proxy war and the benefactor came up with they might as well just said, "Hey, you guys got a plan? Yeah, the Russians admit to their losing and give us everything. Perfect. Let's give it to them."
Yeah.
Well, the hell,
Yeah,
you gave us that in the beginning.
This is the losing side of this conflict, which is the Kiev regime in the U.S. coming to Russia and saying, accept a ceasefire on our terms now or else. I mean, Russia will say niet and hell niet, right? No, hell no. But they won't say it in those terms, right? They'll be polite. They'll talk conditions, right? You're right. They'll drag out, the response and everything, but it will still be no. And then, of course, where does that take us? That takes us right back to where we were with Biden, right? The war continues, right? Nothing changes. Russia and the U.S. will probably continue to talk, and maybe to even continue to improve relations a little bit on a bilateral basis. But the war is going to continue now, right? What is Trump supposed to do after Russia? At the end of the day, it will be recognized that Russia says, no, we don't accept your ceasefire, at least not on the terms that you're
don't you think they got to give a counter proposal, which is basically going to be everything they said?
But
isn't that the way to do it? A counter proposal that's just answer everything ever.
That format. Yeah, that's exactly what I said. Well, they just won't say no. I mean, I would say, no and F no, right? But Putin, thank God, Putin is a lot more diplomatic than I am, right? And they will go through this. They will present a counter proposal they'll just reiterate all the conditions, right? Kiev regime withdraws from all 4 regions, commits to not joining NATO, blah, blah, blah. Everything that they had already been through that Putin laid out in detail last June, right? Russia's conditions for accepting a ceasefire, and they won't change, right, at all, except maybe to get even a little bit stronger, and that's it, right? And then, I mean, the West will continue to try to paint Russia as the uncooperative side that doesn't want peace. Russia will try to squirm out of it and say, well, these are just, conditions, right? And this will just drag on into the foreseeable future. And it's not really clear then where and when negotiations on ending the conflict without a ceasefire go from there. Right? If Trump had been serious about ending this conflict and accepted that Russia saying again and again and again, we don't want a ceasefire, we don't trust you, we don't trust the Kiev regime, right? Sorry, we don't. And let's then talk terms for a permanent settlement of the conflict on our terms, right? Negotiate a bit, but we're winning, right? And if Trump had sidelined the issue of an immediate ceasefire, recognizing this reality, if he was serious about peace, right? Realizing what a bad situation the U.S. was in, right? And trying to get the best deal he could in a bad situation for the Kiev regime, then that's what he would have done. But by pushing this ceasefire like this, which the Russians have been clear they will not accept, that makes perfectly clear to me that they are not serious about ending this conflict, right? Or maybe they were, and they've changed their mind. Who knows what's going on, right? Maybe he's been talked out of it. Maybe the hawks in the Trump administration won this battle and convinced Trump. It's like, who knows what is going on? Because he goes one thing to the other. He pulled the weapons away last week, and Zelensky should leave. And this week, they roll over a little bit, right? And now Zelensky can stay president until the conflict is over, and all the weapons and intelligence flow is back on. 1 week, Zelensky's a dictator, and then did I say that? No, he's not. So Russia has got to be just absolutely like, we can't take anything this guy says seriously. Just finish this. Just go. Right. Escalate whatever it takes to end this as soon as possible. We anything with this TV reality show chuckles is completely not worth our time. Right. Well, I mean, we'll go through the format. It's the United States, of course, and all. But this is a signal to Russia that Russia will only understand as they're not serious about ending the conflict. And look at how the celebration coming from the Europeans. And what has he done in the meantime? He's convinced the Europeans, at least rhetorically, to say that they're about to spend hundreds of billions of dollars on their military industrial complex, which is exactly what he was pushing them to do during his last administration. So he is, burden sharing, right? And he'll probably try to get them to buy a lot of American weapons on top of that to continue the conflict. So, I mean, that's just the way I see things right now. I can't see this taking this seriously at this point, right? He's come to the realization that he can't accept Russia's terms, and that's why they're pushing this ceasefire thing that they know Russia has got to say no to. So, again, where does that leave us? This is the same question I asked as soon as Trump won the election. What does Trump do when Putin says yet? When Putin says no? Trump had started to make me half believe over the last few weeks that he was seriously considering walking away in that situation. And now we're back to square one again. So, and Trump has been clear, right? This has come right out of the White House. So what was all this rigmarole for over the past week with the cutting off of the flow of weapons and intelligence, supposedly, and this fracas over Zelensky and, putting him in the doghouse for a week? That the White House said right out, Trump has put Zelensky in his place. Now that he's rolled over like a good little proxy dog and is barking when he's told to bark and is quiet when he's told to be quiet and sits there, right? That now Trump is happy that he can move on, right? He's beaten them. If he thinks he's going to do that to Russia now, if he thinks he's going to put Putin in his place, I got another thing coming for him. But the White House was they said it outright. Zelensky has been put in his place. And maybe that alpha dog display of dominance over Zelensky is what this whole rigmarole of the last week has been about. I mean, Trump seems oddly fixated on exerting that personal power over pretty much everyone he meets. I mean, we've all seen these games that are played when Trump does handshakes with Macron or someone else, right? It's this absolutely bizarre, I regard it as seriously insecure testosterone deficiency nonsense where he feels he's got to strut around and make clear that everyone understands that he's the alpha dog in the room. Russia's not interested in those games. It's not going to play those games. It's not going to accept those games. Zelensky has rolled over, and maybe that's all they wanted from Zelensky. He's rolled over. He said, when we say ceasefire, you say ceasefire. Ceasefire, right? And
yeah,
now we're there. Bark, bark,
like a hip hop concert or something.
Yeah.
Zelensky
has been properly healed, right? That's he's probably better disciplined than my dogs.
Yeah,
I got to say that.
A couple of things. Here are my thoughts. When you look at a country like the United States that absolutely does not do any diplomacy, you see the results. Your diplomacy skills atrophy. They can't. Number one, the U.S. doesn't have the ability to do diplomacy because diplomacy requires a certain level of empathy and understanding, strategic empathy at a minimum. They can't do that. Yes,
Maturity.
maturity, exactly. And you have to, diplomacy is about the other side. U.S. administrations only respond to internal politics. This shit's always about internal politics, internal games with this party and that party and all that. So if I'm Russia, I'm looking at it, not that I needed to learn this lesson I didn't know. Here's what I think. Let me throw it at you. I think Donald Trump really wants out. I think he does, because this is a pain in the neck for him. He really wants out. But if I'm Russia, I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, but he has no clue how to get out. He really wants some way to walk away. He really would. This is a pain in the neck. It's getting on his nerves. It's stopping him from doing everything. He wants out. I'm looking at that and I realize, I said this a couple of weeks ago. I started thinking about it. He really doesn't know how. He has no plan. He has no clue. So when people say Trump's doing this to do that, and next he's going to do this, it assumes some kind of a plan, some kind of a diabolical plot, right, and next he's going to do that. They're hand to mouth. Well, maybe this will work.
I think you're right.
Try this. Go ahead.
Plan. They're stumbling around, right? From event to event to event, making this up as they go along. And sometimes backtracking and going, contradictions, right? Because they really don't know what they're doing, right? And I also agree with you that a major part of diplomacy is the ability to put yourselves in your, adversary, partner's shoes, right? To be able to understand their position. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it, but you have to be able to do it. And I've studied at MGMO, which is the Russian, it's called an institute. It's a university, it's just the wording, but the Institute of International Relations here in Moscow. And it's where their diplomats and their intelligence train, right? And that is one of the big things, is they teach you to understand other countries and their positions, and then our interests and how we can find common points between those two positions. But the U.S. doesn't do that because they're the exceptional country. They can never even conceive. They simply don't care what the other country's position is. They only care what their position is, right? They have an inability to put themselves, and that is, I don't think that the U.S. was always that way. I think they were capable of serious diplomacy during the Cold War. This is something that came out of the unipolar moment after, the self-dissolution of the Soviet Union and the end of the first Cold War. There's simply no question. And it's not, unfortunately, that disease has now somehow spread to Europe as well, right? Where Kalyakallis is Europe's, top foreign, position, top diplomat. Seriously?
Did you hear what Tom Harrington said about Europe? I love it. He said, if you're a Chihuahua and you play a Doberman on TV long enough, you'll start thinking you're really a Doberman, but you're not. You're still a Chihuahua.
Russia has serious, skilled, prepared diplomats, the best in the world. Sergei Lavrov, Ryabkov, but there's, a whole host of them. And they must really feel when they go into negotiations with their American and European partners, that they're playing a completely different game, right? That they're playing a complex game, and the other side is, I don't know, playing marbles or something.
Finger painting, yeah,
it's bizarre. It's and it tells, right? Because the U.S. When does the U.S. do diplomacy, right? Its idea of diplomacy is carrot and stick. Right, usually just the stick.
Yes, that's simplistic.
Nothing more complicated than that, right? They threaten sanctions. They threaten the bomb. They send the regime change operatives through U.S. aid and NED, right? And that's it. That's their idea of diplomacy.
Coercion or the threat of coercion. Yeah, that's all. Do what we say or else.
Yes, and that's why. That's it. That's why we're in the state of the world today, in so many hotspots around the world that we are, is because what is, if not the hegemon, right, the wannabe hegemon, but still unquestionably, in terms of hard power, the first among other great powers, right, and probably will be for some time yet, if only because of the dollar reserve currency and the impetus of the military situation and Hollywood and these other, mimetic tools. But when the top country is simply incapable of diplomacy on anything but the crudest mafia leg breaker terms, that is the result of the world that we see it today with so many hotspots.
Yeah, and as other countries rise, if all you use is coercion, when countries rise to a point where the coercion never works, not only does it not work anymore, in the back, even though they won't say it, in the back of their minds, they kind of want to get you back. You know what I mean? They won't say it, but in the back of their minds, it's like, I remember when you used to push me around, and perhaps in just a little way they want some pay. In a way, a lot of people want some payback, not in a big way, but if they ever get a chance to yank the U.S.'s chain, they're going to pull on it.
And that's exactly what has happened over the last 3 years. The U.S. thought that they were going to crack the whip and the rest of the world would get behind their sanctions and the Russian economy would collapse. And if the rest of the world had done that, then maybe that would have happened, or at least Russia's situation would have been a lot more difficult, right? But they didn't. They took the opportunity. We're neutral. Go Russia, go Russia, go.
Yeah.
I mean,
Africa's got like Russian flags. The Africans are like flying Russian flags all over the place.
Southeast Asia. Was it, I believe it was
Latin America too.
Of Myanmar, who was just in Moscow this week and tried to pull out some ancient prophecies that were saying in 2,000 years we'll be friends with the Russian king and they support the SM. I mean, like crazy stuff like that. You're right. The rest of the world resents, right, this stick approach that they've been dealt with by the hegemon, right? The U.S. just treats them as inferiors, as vassals. And the one thing that the Russians and the Chinese do differently is they do serious diplomacy and they always show respect, right?
Well, they keep their word. How about that? I think that's a big one.
Yeah, it is. It is a big one, and the U.S. has broken its word how many times? But
if the Russians say we don't like that deal, we're not going to go along with it, that's fine. Because what they're telling you is we don't like that deal. We're not going to go along with it. They're not going to lie to you and say that's a great deal. We'll take it, but they just not go along with it.
But how about this, right? And if you don't agree, they don't sanction you. They don't send agents in to overthrow your government or things like that, right? None of these. Russia is not the Soviet Union. Right.
Apparently, Lavrov or someone has responded because, this infantile, oh, yes, we'll be friends with Russia and suddenly they'll join us in a crusade against China. I don't know if it was Lavrov or whoever it was that recently said in the last 24 hours, China's our friend. We're tight with China. Just sent the message, squash that crap. It ain't happening.
Yeah. We will never betray China.
Yes.
They said that. I mean, if Russia was less honest, at least they could, play the game. Sure, we'll slide a little bit away from China, right? Hands, fingers crossed behind the back. But Russia doesn't even do that. Just flat out, we will not betray China.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you something else. Kursk, what's the latest update on it? And has anything changed other than the Ukrainians are running for their lives and getting torn to pieces with shrapnel? That's pretty much how I sum it up.
That's essentially what's still happening. As far as I've been able to discern from the reports that we're getting, there's still not a huge amount of information, but I do know that Russian flags went up today in Suja itself, right in the center of the city. I saw at least one report in the south I said city. It's not a city, right?
Right.
It's a town. It was 4,000 to 5,000 people. And this is the biggest place that the Kiev regime was able to take. And that's because Kursk is a backwoods, literally, lots of woods, backwoods, dark backwoods, backwater, right? This region that they went into. But they've been driven out of that. And they've basically cleared up almost the entirety. In the past month, the Kursk incursion has been reduced to what was the Suja pocket. And now Suja has been taken, and essentially everything north of that. All that is left is a handful of hamlets, right? Not even villages, not towns, hamlets, right? We're talking, I don't know, 20 houses, that are right on the Russian-Ukrainian border. And there's to believe that the Kiev regime will be able to hold those positions is, I would say, very extremely unlikely. Russia's got the momentum. Their troops are panicked. By the Russian accounts, at least, because Syrski's, according to Syrsky and Zelensky, nothing has happened, right? Everything is fine. We're consolidating defensive positions, blah, 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 but everything's fine. Nothing to look at here. This is why the Kiev regime launched this big drone attack on Russia. What was it, last evening? There was over 300, possibly as many as 500, right? This is what they always do. Every time Russia makes a significant advance, they're fighting the narrative war. They're fighting the information war. They got to make sure that what is on the cover of not only all of the Ukrainian front pages, and that's not a question because they have a unified information policy, but also in the West, right? And the world. Everyone's now talking about the drone attack on Russia rather than Suja failing. So that's why they launched it. And I have not seen, I'm sure they actually hit some military targets, right? But they made perfectly clear, there was no question, that they attacked Moscow with 30-some drones targeting civilian buildings again. And there's absolutely no reaction to this from the West, right? The supposed humanitarians, right? I mean, this, once again, it's a terror attack, right? That is the purpose, to install political terror, as directed intentionally, not by an accident, right? Not by a drone going awry from electronic warfare or a missile, something. No, this was an intentional attack on civilians, right? Which is a war crime, right? But of course, the West will never say this. When the Kiev regime was doing these attacks last year, right, or maybe it was already 2 years ago, the comment from the New York Times was applauding the necessity of bringing the war home to the Russian people, right? Which means that it is perfectly okay to commit acts of political terror and war crimes against civilians as long as the civilians are Russian. That's essentially what the Western media and governments were saying. Well, again, and it was just to change the narrative because they don't want anyone talking about what a disaster, because they put so many reinforcements in terms of both manpower and scarce Western equipment that they couldn't afford to lose into Kursk, right? Again and again and again to try and hold on from it from August, because Zelensky had just dumped so much political capital into it, right? And he had this fantasy idea that he was going to trade Kursk back for some Ukrainian territory during negotiations, and Russia made clear there will be no negotiations while you hold an inch of Russian territory, right? Why? Because we don't have to, because we can take it back. We have the ability. And just in the last 2 months, it became clear that the firebag of Kursk that Russia had let to drag on for a very significant time, for months, because the Kiev regime kept taking good troops and equipment And rather than having them in nice, fortified urban positions, right, in the Donbass or elsewhere, where they would have been much more useful and much more effective, they were willing to send them into this backwater without any buildings to hide troops or equipment in, right? And essentially send them out into the open, strung along one supply line coming from Ukrainian territory into Russian territory. Russia was happy to exploit that fire bag. It helped them attrit the Kiev regime's military faster. Then they made a decision. We've gotten everything we wanted from this. Time to close this fire bag up. And boom, like that, right? That's what they've done in the past month, 2 months. They closed it up. And this is what we see today. And it is almost certain that Russia will not stop at the Russian-Ukrainian border. In fact, they've already taken some territory on the other side of the border there in Sumy region. But they will almost certainly, within, I don't know, a month, whenever the conditions are good, right, whenever they've solidified their control over Kursk, they will go for Sumy and then for Kiev. Right? That is what we're going to see out of the north. It is almost certain that we're going to see a push in the direction of Kiev sometime this year.
I think you're right. Let me throw two things at you. Here's something from a telegram, RIA Novasta. Tehran does not seek war, but if Washington makes a mistake, Iran will respond decisively, and the U.S. will suffer greater damage, Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei says. Now, let me add this. A week and a half ago, the Chinese said, look, we don't want no trouble with you. But if you're going to do a tariff war, a turf war, or whatever, Smurf war, any other kind of war, we're ready. And throw Smurfs at each other. Hey, that would be good. But my point is, here's what I hear. People are sick and tired of this bull crap. They're sick and tired of you threatening me. You're going to come to our border. We're going to hit you with the biggest missile ever. They're sick and tired of it. And numerous countries are saying, look, we're tired of you running your mouth and threatening us. We don't want to fight. If you attack us, we're going to fight. I hear it from Tehran. I hear it from China. Nobody wants a fight. But the U.S., they went from, we're going to overthrow these little countries. Now they're going to the big ones. Oh, yeah, we'll get you too. And the bigger countries are saying, look, we don't want to hear that crap. We don't want to fight you. It's interesting that within a 2-week period, both Iran and China say, we don't want to hear it. If you're going to punch, punch. If you're not going to punch, don't punch. But we're not playing this game anymore.
Did you hear the reports of what the Iranian president, Pezeshkian, said?
No.
So Pezeshkian, he came into office wanting to improve relations with the West, right? He was a reformist, right? I mean, that's and there's
he took a lot of heat for it. He got a lot of heat for that.
He had, deservedly. He has been much less enthusiastic in support of Hezbollah, Kataib Hezbollah, the Houthis, right? Than his predecessor, than Raisi. And that certainly, it's been read in the West and Israel simply as weakness, right? You show weakness and they will exploit it. Well, anyway, even he has now said, we won't do negotiations with Trump. Do what you want. Right? We go to hell. That is what he said, according to the reports that I've read. And to hear that from Pezeshkian, right? And of course, the Iranians are very upset with Donald Trump, right? One, he assassinated Qasem Soleimani. The anniversary of his assassination was just recently, by the way. Their top general for the IRGC, and a man who, if he had lived, possibly today would be the president of Iran, right? He had definite political potential, right? He was a very charismatic figure. So first, Trump assassinated him and a number of Iraqi generals, by the way, when he did it as well in Iraq. And he ripped up the JCPOA that Obama had signed, which, it wasn't a great deal for Iran because they didn't have a nuclear weapons program anyway. But at least improve their economic situation, right? Russia was a part of those discussions, right? That they had negotiated this over half a year, and Iranian leaders had invested serious political capital into their population, and Trump just comes on and rips it out, and now says he wants to do a deal. The Iranians are like, oh, F you.
What are we going to call it? The Minsk Accords 3? You might as well just call every deal from the U.S., call them all the Minsk Accords.
And I mean, it is incredibly likely that Trump ripped up the JCPOA, not because it was a bad deal for the U.S., but simply because it was Obama's. Let's be clear about that, right? So the Iranians are just completely fed up. And they've taken a number of severe blows to their influence in the Middle East in the last year, right? Hezbollah was mauled. Their leadership was heavily decapitated by Israel. They survived, but they took serious damage. The Syrian government was overthrown, and an Iranian-hating, Shia-hating Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda seized control of Syria in its place. The Iraqi government, it feels under threat. So do the Lebanese. And all of this has happened in the last year. Iranian power and influence in the Middle East has taken a serious, blow. Has taken a serious blow. So they got to be looking. They're not looking for a fight. That is clear, right? But they are probably set on retrenchment, right? They've got to rebuild what relationships they've had. The new Russian-Iranian strategic partnership almost certainly improved Russian-Iranian strategic partnership almost certainly will includes Russia building air defense and electronic warfare shields over Iran, but that will take time. It's not something that it's gonna take years, right? And over time, during that time period, it will be coming online and more effective. But to come fully up to speed and to be, cover what it needs to provide a conventional deterrent to U.S. and Israeli attack, Iran will be looking to try to once again not respond to any provocations from the U.S. or from Israel until that happens, right? You think they've shown patience up till now? Well, that will have to continue. But, there's always a red line that can be crossed that will, provoke a response. But Trump hasn't given any particular indication that he thinks he can just crush Iran with tariffs and sanctions, right? That's he hasn't given any indication that he's interested in going after them militarily, but that can always change, right? Depending on who's whispering in his ear and what happens and events. And I just one image sticks in my head of Netanyahu's most recent trip to the US, where Netanyahu sits down and Trump pushes the seat forward into the table like he's Netanyahu's butler or something like that, which is it's bizarre for me. It is bizarre because Trump is so fixated on being the alpha dog in any room, but then he treats Netanyahu like I don't know, like he's the Pope, right? For a Catholic or something like that. I really don't understand it myself.
I do. That was for domestic politics. That was to show all of these people and everybody that, oh no, I'm really a Netanyahu lover. It's always, but to me, it's like so much of his domestic. I do want to ask you this, something that we don't talk about that much, something I don't know much about, but hopefully you do. One of the things that the U.S. has done to try to weaken Russia, which has really not worked, was to try to work through India. And I got to say, for the most part, India, economically, let's face it, it has well benefited India. I think India well knows that the U.S. will use Pakistan and Kashmir against them the first friggin' chance it gets. The relationship between Russia and India, I don't know. I do know there's a historical context to it. I do know they buy a lot of stuff. Your thoughts on bring me up to date on what I need to know about Russia and India's relationship.
Yeah, Russia's strategic partnership and relation with India goes back to the Soviet Union, where the two were extremely close all through that period, despite the fact that India was technically a part of the non-aligned movement. And that's remembered in India today, and that they remember the Soviet Union as helping them in situations during the independence movement with Pakistan and the like. So Modi has spoken about it multiple times, that Russia owes a special debt and will always have a place for India. That said, the importance of that strategic partnership has faded to a certain degree in India's foreign policy, as in the post Cold War world, right? The post First Cold War. India is a global player now, and undoubtedly they do lots of business. There's no question with the United States, with Europe, and the like. That's not to say that has been completely abandoned. India still gets most of its weapons, right, from Russia. And they have several programs where they develop weapons together, right? And that keeps increasing. But the share of its armaments that it gets from Russia is lower than it has been historically, because they are now starting to get some weapons from the US, from Europe, etc. So Russia is always a little peeved about that. I mean, they put it in polite terms, and so forth, but they sense. And there's always a bit of tension there, because this Russia, India, China triangle, right? Where Russia is great friends with China and great friends with India, and China and India, have been at times one fisticuffs fight on a glacier at the top of the world away from going to war with each other, right? Russia plays an important role in keeping Eurasia from going to war by preventing Russia. And both India and China understand that and appreciate the role Russia plays there. But India always gets nervous when Russia as they see it, gets too close to China, and Russia always gets nervous when they see India get too close to the United States. Right? That
kind of gives India, in a way, it gives them a little more. It gives them a little more strength than they actually have, because I'm sure, my understanding too, to be quite frank, is that India has some really quality diplomats also.
Yeah, I think they do. The idea that the U.S. can exploit that difference, though, it can try to put pressure on Russia through India. India was not a major purchaser of Russian oil until the start of the SMO, right? Now they are, if not the first, then one of the top purchasers, of Russian oil, which some of it they use for their own purposes, and much of it they just mix with some other stuff and then sell it back to Europe at a nice stiff markup. And it has helped the Indian government keep inflation under control in India and stabilize the domestic political economic situation there to a much greater degree. And they're well aware of that. Russia and India just signed a long-term a 10-year oil deal. Right. And anytime the West comes up with some sanctions to try to secondary sanctions to punish India and Indian companies for doing business with Russia. They always find a way around it, right? They go after Russia's tanker fleet, right? What they call a shadow fleet, right? Like we're in Battlestar Galactica, not Babylon 5, or something like that, right? Simply because they don't have control, they don't have insurance, right? Russia gets the insurance for its fleet from elsewhere now, right? They're very upset about this shadow fleet that they don't control. But every time they try to tighten down on that, Russia and India have always found a way. They don't defy the sanctions; they just go around them, right? They find out what the new terms of the sanctions are, and they avoid the letter of that law. This will continue, I think, into the future. India they always reject this U.S. attempt to dictate, their economic relations, this challenge to India's sovereignty. They don't call them out on it. They don't get angry. They just ignore it and go around it. And that has been India's, and I don't think that that's going to change because of Trump or anything else, right? It's not to say that the Russian-Indian relationship is as strong as it has been historically. And I think it's fading slowly, but we haven't reached that kind of point yet. And hopefully we never do. Hopefully Russia can play that cementing triangle role, keeping China and India together, solidifying Eurasia between the three of them against U.S. excursions on the broader continent, and keep India from being the U.S.'s Ukraine for its war with China, right? Because they're looking for 1.3, 1.4 billion proxies. That's what they're looking for with India, and I'm sure India understands that to a degree, and hopefully Russia will continue to play this complicated menage a trois balancing act with China and India in Eurasia. It is a very important relationship, and it's not always easy to understand, and people often get miffed. I get miffed every time I see India, not reacting to U.S. secondary sanctions and threats and whatnot, or ridiculous fights with China at the top of the Himalayas on a uninhabited plateau where it's so high and so cold that guns do not work, so that you have to fight each other with fisticuffs and batons. Why? I get a little frustrated with that sometimes with India. But India has to understand, I think, however grudgingly, that Russia's most important bilateral relationship is with China, right?
Yeah.
And India comes second.
Do you have time to talk briefly comment on Syria? I was thinking about all of the people, Latakia Air Base, and this thing seems to, I don't want to say blown up in Erdogan's face, but it's not making Erdogan look. Anyway, do you have time to comment on Syria?
Sure. I think it's one of the most horrible. I mean, I was literally in tears.
Yeah, you can't watch that stuff.
I make myself watch these, but whether it's the Ukraine conflict or I have to bear witness. And my wife gets angry at me. She put on the headphones. I don't want to hear it, and it is one of the most horrible things I've seen. And this is, so basically the jihadists of Al-Qaeda, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, ISIS, whatever you want to call them, because al-Jilani has been the leader of Jabhat al-Nusra, the leader of ISIS in Syria, and the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. And now he's the president of Syria, that everyone's pretending that he's now some type of legitimate leader. Even though, as far as I know, HTS is still a terrorist organization in the United States and the United Nations, but we'll all ignore that. Anyway, already the repression has started, of course, in the ethno-religious minority areas of Syria. And of course, one of those is the Latakia coastline on the Mediterranean, which is the heart of, the Alawites. This is where the Alawites, that were the largest constituent part of the Assad government, for decades, right? Assad, his family well, not his wife was Sunni, but they come out of the Alawites, and they are a similar religious ethnic group to the Shias, right? They have they're closer to Shias than they are to Sunnis. But really, what is important is that they are a tight, close knit religious ethnic group. That the purpose of the Syrian state was to protect the ethno-religious minorities in Syria from the Sunni Islamists and jihadists, right? The Alawites, the Christians, the Druze, the Shia, and with the collapse of the Syrian government, when, let's be frank, the Syrian military and a lot of the bureaucracy, the political leaders in Syria were bought out. They were sold out. They did not fight. When in HTS, what was it, December, right? In the last few months, when they moved out of Idlib into first to Aleppo, and then Homs and Hama, and then on to Damascus, they had some 15 to 30,000 jihadis. The Syrian military on paper was 200,000, right? Even if they only had half of that, they didn't fight, right? They stood. I take it back. The Tiger forces fought, and there was one other division that fought. The rest of them, they were sold out. Their generals, their leaders, they told the men, lay down their guns, take off your uniforms, and run away and go home. That's what they told them. They were bought out, right? The U.S. has a history of doing this in previous conflicts. They did it in Iraq. They did it in Libya. They're very good at it. Who was actually doing it, right? Whether it was the Turkish intelligence, whether it was U.S., and Israeli, and British intelligence working with them. Of course, the majority of this whole thing, because they provided the most military and financial support to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, is Erdogan. Does Erdogan look bad? To who? Right? To Russia and Iran, who are upset, but who have to maintain relations with him anyway, even as they hate his guts, right? Erdogan doesn't care, right? He, as far as he's concerned, he has his proxy, his terrorist proxy in Syria, and his neo-Ottoman ambitions are that much closer. And he's punished Assad for, whatever grievances that he felt that he had. And now the Alawite people in Latakia finally started to show some resistance. And the response was brutal and quick. Turkey sent troops into the country as more like backup forces. I didn't see that they actually engaged much. But HTS, the jihadists, and we're talking international jihadists, right? Chechens, Uyghurs, crazy jihadi fucks from all over the world. They came in and they began massacres of Alawites, of Christians, of everyone, right? They were literally going to people's houses, dragging them all out of their houses in the middle of the night with their socks on and slippers, and just mowing them down, just killing them all in front of their houses. There have been thousands of them killed, right? And we know this because they taped themselves doing it and then put it up on social media, right? And they're proud of it, right? It's not like they're hiding it, right? And the president, Al-Jalani, Al-Shara, whatever he's calling himself these days, he's like, oh, this kind of stuff happens, right? The Western media, the press, they are absolutely evil, right? They're whitewashing an apologia of a genocide as, oh, they were Assad remnants, or, well, some of these Deutsche Welle had an article that made me want to throw up today. Well, some of the videos are real and some of them are probably not. And, this happens and it's there's disinformation and they're trying to destabilize the new Syrian government of Al-Qaeda, right? It's sickening. Two takeaways. One, no one can or will do anything, right? Russia can't help now. They've accepted refugees into their bases, right? They'll feed them. They'll try to argue with them in front of the government. I hope to all the gods that Putin offers citizenship to any of them and gets them out, right? I really hope that happens because they have no hope otherwise, right? I mean, the best they can do is live under jihadist repression.
Die under you mean die under jihadist
genocide?
Really?
Genocide is, the more likely. The Western media is full of whitewashing and apologia. No one else can or will do anything, and this is what happens when you fail to defend the state that defends you, right? I'm a statist. I believe in the state, right? This is an abject lesson in the international relations, classic international relations theorist Hobbes, his book, The Leviathan, which if you ever really want to understand political theory, I mean, that's like on the top 10 list. You really have to read it. And he talked about the Leviathan is the state. And it's a devil's bargain, but it's the devil of human organization that protects you from other humans. Because whatever they may talk about human universals, real human universals are bad, right? Hatred,
Here's another book. State.
Yeah. There we go.
Wait a minute. The State and Revolution.
I definitely will give credos to Lenin and what he wrote at the time without being a Marxist anymore myself. I still have a lot of respect for what Lenin wrote in that. But Hobbes argued that life in a state of nature, right, without the state, is nasty, brutish, and short. And whatever you deal with the state, right? And the state is not a good thing, right? It will always have excesses and repressions and everything. In a state of nature without the state to protect you, you are leaving yourself vulnerable to your neighbors. And whether your neighbors are drunks or druggies or whatever, in a nice part of the world, or whether your neighbors are head chopping Salafists and jihadists in other parts of the world, the state is the only thing. Your collective organization as people to ameliorate at least some of the worst impulses of our unfortunate human nature. And I'm a full believer in the maxim that hell is other people. Right, I'm a misanthrope, right? It is the state that protects you, but you have to protect the state in order for it to protect you. And this is what has happened when the Syrian people lost faith in their state and wouldn't fight to protect it. Now, this was inevitable as soon as the Syrian state fell.
Yep.
This was an inevitable consequence. It is terrible. It is tragic. It should be a lesson to everyone else everywhere. May, whether it's the Alawites, the Christians, the Shia, the Druze, whoever their gods are, may they have mercy on them and protect them, because right now no one else can or will.
Yeah, one of the reasons that I love zombie movies, the philosophy. You know what I mean? In zombie movies, there's always a band of survivors who get together, right, in this zombie apocalypse, and they go wandering off to survive. And what do they always find out? it ain't the zombies that's the big problem. It's bands of other surviving humans that prey on each other. They want to take their stuff, rape their women. You know what I mean? It's always in the zombie movies. The band of the survivors always find out the zombies ain't the big problem. They're dead. They're mindless. They're pretty much predictable. They're zombies. You know, they're good and they're going to bite you. But it's these other devious humans that have come together. It never fails. That's the good thing about zombie movies. The philosophy of zombie movies is worth discussion. Mark Sleboda, once again, tell everybody where they can find you.
The Blinkens and the Boltons of this world and the Erdogans are worse than any zombies.
Far worse than any. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Once again, you can find me at Elon Musk's Twitter X at Mark Sleboda 1 or at Substack or Telegram at The Realpolitik with Mark Sleboda.
All right. Thank you very much, Mark Sleboda. Keep up the good work. And we'll hopefully be able to talk to you next week. And we will. I don't know if we'll get the response. If I were the Russians, I'd take 3 weeks to say no. I mean, excuse me. I would never say no. I would say, I'm glad we're finally talking. And now I'm going to submit my counter proposal. That's what I would never say no. I would submit the counter proposal. Isn't that the nature of what you were trying to do here?
Right. They'll be saying no, but they'll be saying it like that. You're right.
Exactly. All right. Thanks a lot. Everybody, make sure you follow Mark Sleboda on Telegram, follow Mark Sleboda on Substack, follow Mark Sleboda on X, and of course, share this on all your social media platforms. You see everything going across the bottom. Follow me on Rockfin, follow me on Telegram, follow me on Rumble. That's another big one in case for some reason bad things happen. Did you have another comment?
Buy this poor man a coffee. God damn it, he needs some coffee.
Yes, I do. All right, talk to you later. Mark, everybody, we're out.